Hello, everyone. How's everyone doing tonight? Yeah, good. I'm Nyla Budu. I am host and editor of Axios' podcast, One Big Thing. We publish every Thursday morning, and you guys get a sneak preview. This Thursday, Mike Allen and Jim Vandehei are my guests talking about, the news of the past couple of weeks. So I'd like to welcome you this evening to our event around the future of e-mobility. We're going to be taking a closer look at the pathways and what it takes to create a successful electrified transit system. And in tonight's event, we're going to host 3 different conversations before we resume networking around 8 p.m. So I hope to catch up with some of you after our programming. And our first segment this evening, I'm joined here by Michael Berube. He's the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Sustainable Transportation and Fuels at the Department of Energy. Please join me in welcoming him. Hi.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here.
Oh, thanks for having me.
So let's set the stage for tonight. You run a joint office on energy and transportation. How important are these joint offices when it comes to implementing a holistic decarbonization strategy?
First, I have to give credit. Gabe Klein, who works for me, is actually the executive director for the office, and he would kill me if I didn't say that. Many people know him. The joint office is quite honestly critical. I've been at the Department of Energy. I've been involved in transportation all my life. And one of the things, 4 or 5 years ago, my colleagues and I got together and said, the only way we're going to make this transition happen, and happen quickly, is if everyone in government is literally like rowing in the same direction. Even though we all know each other, like each other, work together, if we're not actually working closely to execute, it won't happen quickly. And the joint office has been really key. The Department of Transportation has huge capability to deploy infrastructure and really get money out the door. Department of Energy, for decades now, has been working on EV charging and deploying EV chargers, has the technical knowledge. We're quite literally bringing the best of both together. And as a result, going much, much faster. If I can give one little stat there. So we have 188,000 charging ports in the U.S. right now. That number has grown by 43,000 just in the last year. So 43,000 of 188, and literally I have to update the stat every week because it is growing by thousands a week. So we are definitely making progress. We need more chargers, without a doubt, and we especially are focused on those fast chargers that are along highways that really give people the confidence for that, once every 4 or 5 months, especially right now in the summertime, taking that long trip, you want to have that confidence there'll be that fast charger there and that it will indeed be fast. But I think we are making good progress.
What's the timeline you think before people will be confident in that? And I'm thinking especially of these hot temperatures, and we know how much more difficult that is in extreme temperatures.
You know what? I just comments. I just got a little briefing this morning on extreme temperatures. In hot weather, actually, EVs don't lose that much, and gas engines also lose. Cold weather can be a little harder, but gasoline engines lose 10 to 15% of their range also in cold weather. Electric vehicle in really cold can lose more than that, but not. Given today that your average new EV is close to a 300-mile range vehicle, it's manageable. But I think in the time frame, it's interesting. It's about 1 month after you buy an EV. You have the EV, and I'm sure a number of people here in the room do, and you realize I'm actually plugging in at home the vast majority of the time. I actually don't have, especially if you have a 250, 300-mile range vehicle, you don't have nearly as big a problem. The challenge, right, is for those people that don't have that EV yet. And I think that it's going to continue to grow. We've hit over 10% of new vehicle sales now as EVs. That is continuing to grow. It's been growing all through this year. One of the number of things that will happen is these new federally funded chargers are getting out and all these other ones. You see that sign on the highway. And to me, that sign is, yes, it's there for the person that has an EV, but it's especially there for all the people that don't have an EV. They see those signs and say, next time I'm shopping for a car, I just passed 10 signs in this road trip. I guess there might be EVs out there. So I think that will help a lot over the next few years.
In March, we saw the administration change the mileage scorecard when it comes to the new petroleum equivalency factor for EVs. How much do you think we'll continue to see these real-world adjustments when it comes to these pretty complex standards?
For those that don't know, there is a set of fuel economy requirements. EPA has a set. NHTSA has a set. When you have an electric vehicle, you have to, the NHTSA rule is literally 8 miles per gallon. You have to convert that EV that doesn't use any gallons, of course, into that, and this petroleum equivalency factor, what does that? DOE recently updated that after being petitioned and updated kind of all the latest technology, standards, and background out there. At the end of the day, that's really all behind the scenes. That doesn't change anything what a consumer sees. When a consumer goes today and they buy a car and they look at that EV range, and that miles per gallon equivalent on the label, that is all still true and accurate. In fact, what we did, which is this very detailed in the weeds thing, actually brings that number a lot closer to what consumers are seeing. But I think the key thing is, consumers have told us that they really need 270, 275, 300 miles of range. That's like a point where they are, that it really meets their comfort level. It meets if they're on a long trip. It meets their daily life. They're only charging, maybe once a week, typically, if they're not on a long trip. So I think that's the key point to get to. And that's where today pretty much all new cars are.
Right. Do you feel like we're culturally at a point where we are able to sort of speak the language of EVs? What do you want? How fluent do you want people to be?
I think, like a lot of new technology, right? You get your first adopters who are, I don't speak the language, I read up everything about it. That's not the majority of people, right? The majority of people,
it might be the majority of this room.
Maybe the majority of this room, but the majority of people are like, I have a car to get me from point A to B, bring the kids to school, get to the doctor. It's basic transportation. Or if you're a business, it's about getting your goods to market, and that's what counts. That is really the only thing that counts. The second thing that counts is the cost and how much it will cost me. Right now, transportation is the second highest expense for a typical American household. Second highest after housing itself. So it's a huge pocketbook issue. It's a big business expense. So I think what people are starting to get more comfortable with, and what will happen is you get a word of mouth effect that, like anything, it grows. After COVID, we all learned a lot about exponential growth. Word of mouth tends to grow exponentially. First a few, and then a few more, and then it grows and grows. Today, people are hearing now from J.D. Powers, who does a lot of survey, that new electric vehicles are actually at cost parity with the equivalent gasoline vehicle. So apples to apples, same vehicle, they are at parity, and you save $2,200 over the life of the car and fuel, $6,000 on maintenance. So that will be a big driver for people.
And how do you think the political climate, the politicization of this, if you look at what was said at the RNC last week, former President Trump saying, I'm going to abolish EV mandates on day one if I'm reelected, how do you think that affects public perception?
There are no EV mandates out there. There is really, in my opinion, this is all about choice. Right? And so I think what we need to continue to do is give people better choices and new choices. So again, it's a choice that works, that they like. EVs, actually 80% of people buy EV say they are going to get another one because they really like it. So it works. It has to be affordable, and it has to address the climate crisis in front of us. And EVs do all those things. So that's out there, but I think the important thing is if we give consumers better choices, that's at the end of the day what people really care about, right? Here in Washington,
do you feel like those
policy.
better choices are available now?
Oh yeah, like I said, today the vehicles are already at cost parity. You have many more vehicles that are available under $30,000. There's no question that people who drive EVs love their EVs. They love the experience.
So let's talk about moving on from personal vehicles to heavy transport in particular. I know you've in the past talked about how important decarbonization, heavy transport is when it comes to achieving overall efficiency goals. What are you thinking around the infrastructure challenges for zero emission trucks? They
are absolutely out there. We published about 2 or 3 months ago with huge support from industry a zero emission freight infrastructure strategy. And what it basically said was, it is not a good idea to go out and build infrastructure everywhere all at once for freight. It's different than light duty. So in the case of freight, what we laid out as a strategy is first build around ports. EPA is getting close to announcing $3 billion in awards for in and around ports. MARAD just put money out as well. EPA's 4.7 billion. These numbers are so crazy, it's hard to remember them. From their climate program, also had a lot of money for our trucks and around ports. So what we need to do is, over the next 2-3 years, build in and around where those trucks are not going very far. They're coming back to home base, and that's practical. You can do that today with a Class 7 8 truck that's electric. It's driving 200-300 miles, coming back to home base, and then you start building out from there in between, and then you connect the hubs. So we've basically laid out a 10-year strategy where you slowly start building this out. We can do this, and we can definitely do this. It won't happen overnight, but it also doesn't have to happen overnight.
So when we think about electrifying, for example, school buses, one of the biggest challenges for a school bus fleet, when you think about it, is designing and building an infrastructure, maybe, as much as 5 megawatts of power you might need, right, for a fleet. So do you think the bipartisan infrastructure bill and the IRA right now provide enough of the financial incentives for this industry to get off the ground?
Yeah, no, I would say without a doubt they do. You just look at, there's $160 billion of investment that has been announced. Now that's a relatively small amount of that is actually the federal dollars, but the federal money from the infrastructure law has really spurred that. $160 billion for building EVs, electrified school buses, EV chargers, batteries. Those are plants going now in the ground. So I think with the tax credits, the production tax credits, we now have enough EV battery capacity announced in the US as being built to cover almost 100% of the new vehicles sold. By 2030, we'll be close to 100% capacity factor, which means we're probably going to be exporting batteries as a country, which is not a bad thing. There's a lot of jobs that come along with that. I think for school buses in particular, one of the things that we're finding, and through the Joint Office, we're doing a lot of work on technical assistance, is they sit for a long time at night. They don't travel that far. They can do a slow charger a lot of the time. They don't have to have these really big megawatt level charging capability. The Postal Service found that, right? At first, they were thinking, as they looked at all the costs, all the things, they said, actually this charging, we can charge these overnight at low level too, and then they can, be a lot more cost effective. So there's a lot to be learned. There's no doubt we are at early stages of this transition, but in my mind, almost all the signs are still very positive.
So we just are about to wrap up here. I just want to ask before we go what your goals are for the final 6 months of this Biden administration.
We, about 1 year ago, we published the Transportation Decarbonization Blueprint, laying out a real-world plan of how to decarbonize every mode: rail, aviation, maritime, light duty, heavy duty, farm and agriculture. In the next 3 or 4 months, we are going to now publish the detailed action plans that we've been developing with a lot of work with industry, with stakeholders, with local communities of what those plans look like. And it's a little different for each one, but it will basically lay out what needs to happen collectively, not just by government, but what do we all have to do to get maritime there and rail, aviation, and all of these different sectors. And I think that that'll be pretty positive. Yeah, so part of my goal is, let's get that out there. We're going to keep building out the chargers, and then we'll have exciting next year.
Well, we are out of time, but thank you so much, DOE's Michael Berube, for joining us here.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
So we're going to please don't go anywhere. We're going to do a little quick changer out here, and then I'm going to welcome up Nick Johnson. Oh, he's coming already.
I'm already here. I'm right here. Hello, I'm Nicholas Johnston. I'm the publisher of Axios. We're going to do a little quick chair swap here, but thank you so much for joining us today. This is such an opportune topic. If it weren't so hot outside and I weren't in a suit, I probably would have used an e-mobility solution to get here today. Maybe I'll take one home when I don't worry about the weather so much. And so I think this is a really timely thing to talk about. We're so grateful for all of you here, Axios readers and supporters, for being here. And of course, we're hugely grateful to our partners who make everything possible at Axios. So a huge thanks to UL Standards and Engagement for supporting us tonight. And so I'm very excited to welcome to the stage for a view from the top conversation, David Martin, who is Director of Government Engagement, and Dr. Denise Durant, who is the Director of Data Science and Standards Engineering. Denise and David, welcome to the Axios stage. So let's start big picture here. This is a logo I think all of us recognize and are somewhat familiar with, but maybe we could dig in a little bit more to start about what UL Standards and Engagement is as a nonprofit that works on safety standards. And maybe Denise, you want to give us a scene setter, perhaps?
Yeah, definitely. I think when most people see the symbol UL, you think about the sticker or the tag that you see on a lot of the different products in your home or when you're out and about. And we are a part of the UL enterprise that focuses on developing standards. So we develop standards through a consensus-based process. We convene subject matter experts from a variety of different fields. And our goal is to ensure that we are developing standards that provide guidance to the testing, manufacturing, and product designers to ensure that when products are introduced to the marketplace or as products are evolving, new technologies are emerging, like in the case of e-mobility, that there's guidance to ensure that these products are safe. Because the last thing that we want, if you think back to 2015 when that hoverboard came out, is for people to go out there, buy this cool new product, and guess what? It's not necessarily safe.
So,
We have a colleague who puts it really well. She calls standards safety directions, which is exactly what they are. And what makes them so rigorous in our case, in ULSE's case too, is that they're continually revisited to keep pace with the change in technology.
I mean, that's the point, I think, of new technologies, which is great. And I think so let's narrow this focus a little bit to the technology we're talking about e-mobility. Like, we probably walked around them on the sidewalks. We saw people using them. They're relatively new. There's a lot to learn. Tell us a little bit of that from your viewpoint. What are the misconceptions? What should we know?
Yeah, so I'll start by saying, being in DC in this area, I will say that the landscape for something as simple as an e-bike is totally different than where I'm from in North Carolina. You don't see a lot of e-bikes, but what we know is that regardless of what that, landscape looks like, the safety challenges associated with these products doesn't change. And so what we know about e-bikes, what we know about a lot of products that are incorporating batteries is that really, because of that lithium-ion battery, there are some safety risks. And introducing, electrified forms of transportation doesn't necessarily mean that we can introduce like new hazards to the marketplace. We don't want to do that. And so really when it comes down to these e-mobility products, we know that the lithium-ion battery, again, introduces a level of risk that we have to be aware of. We'll talk a little bit about what some of those are, but primarily what most of you have probably seen in the news is battery fires. Related to e-bikes, related to e-scooters. Understanding what those are, how those are caused. If we had a whiteboard up here, it would be dangerous for me. But understanding...
Stick around afterwards at the bar and we can go into it more, right?
But knowing the science behind these products is important, but understanding how those products can interact with different things with different users is important as well. And as standards developers, those are all inputs that go into what goes into that standard and how that standard can ensure safety.
And two more misconceptions too. There's kind of this idea that this is a New York City problem. It's not just a New York City problem. It's really present everywhere. So it's really important that cities and states start really taking a hard look at this issue. I think another one is that, it's just wealthy people buying these expensive e-bikes and e-scooters or whatever the device is, and that's not true either. Actually, according to our data, shows that over half of the consumers who purchase these devices are actually doing so for work purposes. So that's really key that we're maintaining access for those people to carry out their daily lives.
So it's a potentially much bigger issue than maybe people just assume it is. Well, so like, we don't have a whiteboard here, but it's like, what's the best you can do as far as like walk us through a little bit what we know so far, what you're thinking about, what's over the horizon that you're more looking into?
Yeah, so definitely when you think about batteries, specifically lithium-ion batteries, one of the primary risks is something called thermal runaway. And you've probably seen that on the news, you've probably heard about that. But simply put, thermal runaway is this phenomenon where that battery enters a state of uncontrolled self-heating. Uncontrolled self-heating means that battery has generated a whole lot of heat and energy and it's trying to release it. So for something like an e-bike, we don't want that to happen because that can result in fire and explosion and the release of toxic gases. And when you think about e-bikes and where they're used and how they're stored and how they're charged, those are significant safety factors that we have to be aware of, and then we have to find solutions like standards that actually address those hazards to ensure that the public is safe.
Where are we on that standard journey? And I'm not asking just because I'm here on stage. I'm asking because I literally might ride one of these home, and now I just want to learn a lot more about what those potential risks are, and like walk us through like the steps we're at to where we can get to a place where we really are truly safe.
So I can go on and on.
Let's do it.
But what I'll say first is, our standards are always on a journey because I think there is an aspect to developing a standard to address an initial need, and sometimes that need is there's a whole lot of incidents out there, so how do we resolve that? But then there's also the aspect of these products are evolving. So there's standards out there right now that might cover a bike, but we don't have those standards within our portfolio. We have the standard for e-bikes, electric bikes. And so the standards are having to respond to these new technologies. And I think one of the most important things is if you look across our ULSE portfolio, the number changes depending on who you talk to, but right now I think there's over 1,500 standards in our portfolio, ranging from something as simple as a life jacket to an e-bike or an e-scooter to a lithium-ion battery. What's important is how are those standards actually addressing the safety risk in a relevant fashion. They're very comprehensive. Some would say, these standards are too complex because as a manufacturer, as a product designer, I'm having a hard time getting this to market because the standard has all of these different things that I have to comply with.
And part of that life cycle as well is just the awareness and education. So we appreciate smart consumers who are aware that, it's one thing if you go outside and you rent a scooter and you ride it from point A to point B, you drop it off, you're done. But if you're purchasing one of these things that's going to go in your home, you're going to charge it yourself, you may charge it at work, then really make sure that you're educated about the standards that it should meet and make sure that's the safest device possible.
Are there solutions that exist now? What is working as far as addressing some of these concerns?
In addition to understanding the safety, the science behind, lithium-ion batteries and e-bikes, the other thing that we try to understand and, bring more awareness to is consumer sentiment. So our research team at ULSC, they have done an outstanding job of helping us understand what consumers know about these types of products. And so I'm going to spit out a few statistics here because I think this is important for the topic. But not just the science, but understanding awareness. We know that there are significant awareness gaps when it comes to products that employ lithium-ion batteries. So what has helped us is understanding what do people know. Our research shows that about half of the people that own an e-bike have no idea that it's powered by a lithium-ion battery. On top of that, almost half of e-bike users who charge their device at home charge it in front of an exit, which again introduces another significant safety risk. Knowing that, we can ensure that the standards are comprehensive and address some of these things.
We're also starting to see some solutions emerge, we think, too. So, for example, in 2023, I think in September, New York City passed a law that would regulate the purchase and the sale of lithium-ion battery e-bikes and e-scooters. It actually requires those devices to conform to our standards. And in 2023, there were 18 deaths, and not injuries, there were deaths due to lithium-ion battery fires. And so far in 2024, there's been only one. So, again, it's just encouraging folks to take that look.
Before we get the hook here, what I love doing these events in DC, only here can you get standing room only to talk about e-mobility. I love the policy crowd here. Give them some homework. How can they help?
I would say, before you ban devices and ban new innovations and technologies, take a look at standards. There is a great system where companies come together, the best and the brightest, but also experts in academia and consumers, and they create these rigorous voluntary standards that keep people safe. So it's not always a matter of regulation or bans. We can do something in between.
Denise, what's your homework assignment for everybody?
Definitely. UL has 3 standards. Specifically related to e-bikes, e-scooters, and the batteries that are used in those products. So 2849, 2271, 2272. We have a lot of great resources out there about those standards. Would love for you all to take a look at that on our website, learn more about these things so that we can truly drive change and advance safety.
And Denise will be out on the balcony afterwards with her whiteboard.
Yes.
Going through the science.
Bring the whiteboard in.
Denise, David, thank you so much for being here. Thanks to UL Standards and Engagement for making today possible. Stick around. I'm going to bring Nathan Bomey up to close the show.
We have one more conversation. We're going to do a little bit of a chair switch up here. I'm Nathan Bomey. I am a business reporter at Axios and co-author of Axios Closer. Our business newsletter comes out after the closing bell every day. So for this event on the future of e-mobility, I guess they decided that someone from Michigan originally should be here, someone who used to cover General Motors full-time, believe it or not, for the Detroit Free Press. And my best accomplishment ever was covering GM without ever knowing how to drive a stick shift. So maybe we'll find out if our next guest can drive a stick shift as well. He used to be a mayor, now he's the secretary for the Department of Transportation. Please welcome Pete Buttigieg.
Evening.
Okay, we're not going to ask you if you can drive a stick shift because that's just too tough. I can't, so we're not going to ask you. But
3 hours of driver's ed. That's where it began and ended
right.
for me.
We are both Michiganders. I don't live there anymore. You do live in Michigan now. I know that Michigan is a big Delta hub. And today you announced that you're investigating Delta for what happened over this last several days. Are you taking Delta on the way home?
I did take Delta a few days ago. Look, what is going on is unacceptable. Everybody was impacted, or just about every airline was impacted on Friday. But the question is, how quickly can an airline recover? All of the other airlines recovered within a day or two. That has not been the case for Delta. Even today, hundreds of flights have been canceled. Overall, more than 5,000. We estimate more than 500,000 passengers have been impacted. So we are investigating both how the breakdown happened and what's going on with customer service. Because when there is a problem, you got to be able to get a hold of somebody in a reasonable amount of time. We're hearing a lot of indications that that's not happening either. So we're fielding a lot of complaints. We're preparing the investigation and obviously pressing Delta to meet their obligations to passengers.
To compensate passengers, this is something that you've really pressed for, is this idea that people aren't getting the compensation that they deserve when they're wronged by the airlines.
A couple things are especially important. One is 2 years ago, we secured enforceable commitments from all of the major airlines, including Delta, about what they would do in a situation like this. And this means they have an obligation, again, an enforceable obligation that we can follow up on to take care of things like ground transportation and hotels, meals, rebooking. But also, it is now the case that every passenger should be secure in getting a cash refund, unless they prefer something else. And we're making cash refunds the default in a situation where you get canceled and you don't get rebooked. I reminded Delta of that responsibility too.
This came up earlier this evening in one of our other conversations, but President Trump just a few days ago attacked this idea of EV mandates but others have pointed out we don't really have mandates per se, but clearly the administration has pursued EV adoption. And EV adoption has been, I think, slower than anticipated. How do you feel about where we are today and what needs to be done, if anything, to accelerate that transition?
What we know is that every year more Americans buy EVs than the year prior. And there are really two things we're doing to facilitate that process. One is to make them cheaper. That's what the tax credit is all about. The other is to make sure that you can find a charger when you need one. Even though 80% of EV charging happens at home, it remains very important for those whose homes don't have a garage or a easy way to plug in a car, and for those longer use cases, those longer trips, that we have the kind of EV charging network that would be consistent with that. Look, it took us 100 years to get the network of gas stations we have today. We just don't have that long for EV charging network.
Okay, so let's talk about that. The EV charging network, just short of 200,000 publicly available chargers today. We know that most people charge at home, but they need the confidence that they can charge while they're on the road. You've got this big infrastructure plan to invest in EV charging throughout the country, but critics say it's not moving fast enough. Where do you stand, and are you comfortable with the pace that it's rolling out?
It is moving fast enough to meet the president's goal, and I think we're actually going to come out ahead of the president's goal of having 500,000 chargers across the country by the end of this decade. Just since Joe Biden took office, the number of publicly available chargers has nearly doubled. It's at 188,000. That has been driven by the private sector. Now we're going to begin coming in with federal dollars to help fill in some of those gaps, respond in some of those places where it is not yet profitable for the private sector. The bulk of those chargers will be installed in 26, 27, and 28, but the first handful of them are already going into the ground and will soon be in use.
Is this just a matter of deciding where they need to be, and that's just difficult because the blocking and tackling of actually picking locations is hard?
That's part of it, but a lot of it is what goes into developing a site for a charger, especially these fast-charging, high-capacity chargers. It's not just like the thing you hook up in your garage. It requires procurement, site work. We're talking about, again, doing in a matter of a handful of years what took decades to build up in terms of America's network of gas stations. And it's not the same as gas stations. They don't belong in the same places precisely because, unlike gas, a lot of the fueling of electric vehicles, the majority of it will happen at homes and workplaces. And yet, we can't leave it only to homes and workplaces and expect to have the equitable and widely available network that America needs.
I think a lot of people would say that you have your finger on the pulse of sort of Midwestern culture. You're from Indiana, now you live in Michigan. But there is some cultural concern that some people are moving away from EVs. It's becoming politicized. How concerned are you that EVs will become too politicized, that it affects the transition?
Look, I think it's frustrating anytime something that should be totally non-political somehow gets an ideological valence. I would have said and would say the same thing about public health and vaccinations. There should be nothing ideological about that, and yet it became almost a partisan thing with really disturbing results in terms of some prediction that your political party could be a predictor of whether you were protected from something like COVID. I think it's a little more scrambled in the case of EVs. I think the reason ultimately will not be a barrier for the long term is that there are so many benefits to having one. So you don't have to be a Democrat or a Republican to want to save money. And now that we have reached the point where the data show that for an equivalent model between an EV and a gas model, you're now pretty much the same price, maybe even a little better on the EV. For the rest of the time you own it, you're definitely saving because it's cheaper to charge than it is to fuel up with gas or diesel, and there's less maintenance on these. That means over time that there's a clear savings. As long as that remains true, then people would have to, we're getting pretty close to where people would have to choose to pay extra. Just the way the market dynamics are working. We're not making them pay extra, just to be clear. Sure. But we're getting into a situation where you'd have to just be really, really committed to these more dirty and expensive fuels in order to continue choosing vehicles that use them, especially as the EV technology gets cheaper and cheaper.
But you do have to make some compromises, at least now, to drive an EV. You have to at least plan your trip. If you're planning to go more than a few hundred miles, you need to be more strategic about it. In that cultural barrier, it seems like a lot of people just want to believe that they can drive across the country at any given moment. And that's where you come in. You have to get those chargers in place, right?
Yeah, and we're recognizing this is not an overnight transition. Our expectation and goal is that about half of new vehicle sales be EV by the end of this decade. We don't have the grid or the charging network to accommodate some kind of overnight switch. We're not driving one. We're definitely not mandating one. And we're not expecting one. For some people, it'll be the right answer to have a hybrid. That's actually what our family has. Our family minivan is a plug-in hybrid. It's electric for the first 30 or 40 miles, which
Pacifica?
gets us Pacifica, yeah, gets us to daycare, gets us to Target. But if we gotta, if I gotta drive the dog between DC and Michigan, the gas engine kicks in. So people will figure out the right answer for them. What we are doing is making it more affordable for those who choose to move in that direction.
So you don't feel like you lost your cool factor buying the minivan or anything like that?
No, I very much do, yes. But you swear you're never going to be a van person, and then you become a dad.
Hey, a few years ago, Kia introduced a minivan. They called it a multi-purpose vehicle, so you can use that if you want. Okay. When we talk about EV adoption, if price is a huge barrier for some people, and the president just recently announced 100% tariffs on EVs coming from China. And if, we need people to buy EVs and at the same time need to fight climate change, should we just embrace cheap EVs coming from China?
No, because it's not fair competition. We're talking about I can't even call it industrial policy. It's really a market distortion policy driven by China. By the way, not because the Chinese Communist Party is populated by environment buffs, right? I mean, they're doing this because it is strategic, because they understand the strategic value of trying to dominate the EV market, because the EV market is where the entire automotive sector is going. This is why it really harmed our economic security when the Trump administration all but deliberately gave China the advantage in the EV market. And now we are working to reclaim it onto American soil. And this is really personal for me, precisely because I grew up in the industrial Midwest. I grew up not realizing it was unusual to have acres of collapsing factory buildings on either side of the road when you went to school until I left to go to college. And having seen firsthand what can happen, not just to a company, but to a community, when industry fails to keep with the times and fails to innovate, we have got to make sure that as the industry shifts to EVs, it's an America-made EV revolution. That's been a big focus for President Biden.
I mean, yeah, I have family in Flint, Michigan, and in Janesville, Wisconsin, people who have seen what's happened when auto factories have shut down. But we know that Apple, for example, designs the iPhone here, doesn't make it here, and no one seems to have an issue with that. But cars are different?
Yeah. And again, we're not just talking about the fact that there's different cost to different factors of production. We are talking about a manipulation of the market by China, which is why the president has stood strong with trade measures to protect that domestic industry.
Let's pivot quickly to autonomous vehicles and self-driving cars. The Department of Transportation has been investigating Tesla for several years over the autopilot technology and why they call it autopilot. Is Tesla promising more than they can deliver?
Well, I am concerned when I hear some of this language that's being thrown around in marketing materials. Just to be super clear, the driver, any car you can buy today, I don't care how fancy the cruise control or anything else that it's called is, if you can buy it today, then it is a vehicle that requires you to be fully engaged in the driving task. These are driver assistance systems, not driver replacement systems. And I'm concerned about anything that leads people to believe otherwise. By the way, I'm really bullish on the safety potential of these automating technologies. But precisely because they stand theoretically to save so many lives, we have to be very thorough and responsible about having that technology unfold safely. And just from a regulatory perspective, foreseeable misuse of a feature is enough to make that feature considered to be defective.
What's your relationship like with Elon Musk? Do you hear from him? Do you talk to him?
I mean, he doesn't call very often, but yeah, I've met him. I visited their facility in Texas and had a long conversation with him. Then I remember early on having a meeting with all of the OEMs where he committed, he kind of in passing said that he was going to open the supercharger network, and I wasn't sure whether to take that seriously or not. Later on, that's exactly what happened, and he knows that I appreciate that. So look, ultimately, there are lots of different stories, styles, and personalities in the automotive sector. Our concern is just to make sure that we don't pick winners and losers. We want these companies to, we want their mode of success to be delivering excellent, well-designed, safe, clean, preferably made in America vehicles.
What about the Cybertruck? You gonna drive that?
It's got too many angles for my taste, but that's just a matter of taste.
All right, we probably only have a minute
Also,
or two
I'm not sure I can afford one. But.
Well, I understand. All right, we only have a minute or two. Okay, we have to ask you, news of the moment, probably everybody's waiting for this. There's a lot of talk about the Veep stakes right now. Are you interested at all?
For better or for worse, as long as I'm wearing this suit talking about DOT stuff, I cannot talk about campaigns and elections.
See, I kind of thought you'd say something like that. Okay. All right, well, let's end on one fun thing. How did you get here today? You were across the street. Did you scooter? Did you walk? Like, how does a transportation secretary get from door to door?
Yeah, I just walked. Yeah, nothing too dramatic about that.
All right, thank you so much, and thank you to all of you. We have until about 8 o'clock here, so you can mill about. We appreciate you coming to Axios. Please subscribe to Axios AM, Axios PM, my newsletter, Axios Closer. And thank you again. Please a round of applause for Secretary Buttigieg.
Thank you. Thanks, Ryan.